My gut says this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, listen to your gut.
And listen to the Be Well Now podcast. I'm Nick, the Curious Patient. Dr. Ron Dummar, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Now? Are you doing well now?
I'm being well now.
That's what it's all about. Gut health is a big deal. Today, 5 tips on how to get your gut health right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to start this because our audience is growing, but they may not know who you are.
Right.
Who are you? Why should we listen to you? And then let's get into how gut health plays out in your practice and what you've learned about it and how we can improve our gut health.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Ron Dummar. I'm the medical director at Community Health and Wellness in Heber City, up near Park City, Utah. Big-time ski town, so we do a lot with athletic injuries, outdoor participants, and things like that.
You see the beanie I'm wearing? It's a cold, snowy day out.
Yep. I was up skiing this morning at 6:30, so it was a lot of fun. My son's a racer, avid ski racer. So anyway, definitely into all of those type of activities. But I'm a functional medicine doctor, or what I like to say is integrative medicine. So not just holistic or not just homeopathic or all natural, but helping patients to triage from the natural and the herbal and the medicinal to the prescription, right? When is it that they should be going from home care and from using herbals and from using nutrition to actually triaging to a more of a synthetic medication?
So speaking of synthetic medication, as I interrupt you there, I was on tetracycline in my 20s for acne.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I figured out about gut health, because I ended up in the hospital where my stomach was so irritated that they thought I was having like an appendicitis situation. And I then met my first chiropractor, referred through somebody at work because my back was hurting. And he was like, wait, you're on all of those antibiotics for acne? He's like, you should try probiotics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's messed up your gut flora. And that's when I started to realize, oh my gosh, these probiotics are helping my stomach feel better. That's how I figured out about the gut.
Yeah.
So at some point, I think it's very popular culture now. Probiotics in this yogurt, and people know what probiotics are, generally speaking, in some circles at least. They're learning about the gut. So that's my story. That's why I'm passionate about this. But tell me why you care and why we should care about gut health.
Well, that was really great, and you actually foreshadowed some of what we'll be talking about today. But for me, gut health, it typifies what we put into our bodies. And I think of ourselves as high-end sports cars, let's put it that way, or we should treat ourselves that way, right? I say to my kids oftentimes, make sure what you put into your mouth is representative of the level of respect you have for yourself. And I think that's an important thing to remember. We should all have the highest amount of respect for ourselves and therefore let that dictate what we place into our mouths. So with that in mind as well, how does that impact our guts? Well, from an automobile standpoint, I'm going to put the highest quality gasoline, the highest quality oil. I'm going to make sure it's well tuned, make sure the alignment is right so that I'm a well-functioning machine. And we want to care for ourselves to the highest degree as well. So from a gut health standpoint, what I put into my gut is going to display in a variety of ways in my physiology, because it's going to absorb into, first of all, we're going to have all of those nutrients broken down. Okay, so let's say whatever we consume is going to be broken down into its complex parts. And the liver requires amino acids, which is one of the basic building blocks that we're supposed to be getting from our foods, to make certain hormones, certain proteins that perform physiological functions in the body. And if we're giving the body really poor quality construct of these amino acids, we're going to get a really poorly burning product, such as a vehicle, right? If you put poor quality gas into it, you're going to get a very poor quality burn, or you're going to build up all sorts of sludge and sediment in the pistons themselves.
Okay, so I think it makes sense. What you put in your body is going to have an effect on how it performs and how you feel. So where does the gut come in?
As far as the way you feel?
Yeah, or like the reason gut health is important.
So gut health itself is so critical. To me, it plays a role in all of our physiology because we cannot have properly balanced physiology. The blood product, the organs themselves are, they require proper gut function. Okay? So let's say that I'm consuming or under-consuming a certain mineral or a certain food. At some point, I'm going to see that develop in my health, in my physiology. Let's say on the reverse end, I'm consuming a food that happens to be somewhat inflammatory or irritating to my body. Well, I'm going to see that also display in my body. It could display as heat expressing in my face. It could lead to an overabundance of a certain pathogen or bacteria that's usually just dormant and naturally occurring in our body, but now because of this new environment that was created by that overabundance of that food production or food consumption, now I'm producing or created an environment that allows that bacteria to basically rear its head and become the king in that environment. That actually is what we call an infection. All of us have in our bodies, we all have staph, we all have strep, we all have a lot of these different type of cultures. When you go to some place and you have the swab done, oh yeah, you've got an overabundance of this, right? There's a couple of different things that cause problems. One is having a bacteria overabundant in the wrong area. So for instance,
Of your gut?
Of your gut, of your body.
Okay.
So your eye itself has its own biome, right? It has its own bacterial makeup that keeps it healthy. Your nasal cavity as well has its own bacterial makeup, right? That keeps it healthy. Your gut and your GI, so your stomach has a specific bacterial makeup that keeps it healthy. Same with your mouth, the oral cavity, and with your small intestine. So there's a condition that some people develop called SIBO, some people say, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Okay, so the overgrowth is the indication of the infection or the problem, not the fact that it's there, but of the overgrowth. And this is actually indicative of all infections. It's an overabundance of a bacterial culture. So in the small intestine, if we get a bacterial culture that is indicative or should be present in another part of the intestine, such as the large intestine, then that is going to cause problems for us. Okay.
And speaking of problems, which I don't think this is one, we have both of our two kids here. We're trying to make podcast time happen, and we told them to be quiet. They were good for a while, and now they're being kids. So if you hear some kids in the background,
just
they're
enjoy
having
it.
fun, right?
Just enjoy it.
Because you know who's being well now? Them.
They are. They're in their flow right now, for
They're
sure.
in their flow, and we could do well to
So
channel.
let's talk about some things with regards to gut health that are signs of how do I know if my gut is maybe not healthy or on the verge of becoming unhealthy, or if I have a disruption in gut health. One of those things is, as you mentioned, skin conditions. It could be acne, could be eczema, could be a more widespread rash, okay? And this could be indicative of a certain pathogen that's expressed through the body, or it could even be indicative of certain products or compounds that are let in through the intestinal wall that otherwise shouldn't have been let through. Sometimes we call this gut permeability. So sometimes people will develop irritation to the lining of the gut wall itself, and we have these what are called tight gap junctions, and they're meant to open and close, and they'll let something through when they see it needs to come through and into the bloodstream, and then they'll close. Well, sometimes they'll get irritated. The lining will be so ulcerated and irritated, and it just gaps open, and it can't close, right? It's like stuck, so it can't really fully open and close, and it just lets product go through, and then all of a sudden
Lets it go from where to where?
From the gut, from your GI,
which is where
past the wall, so in your abdomen, into your blood.
And it doesn't
So there's a
belong there.
barrier between your gut, between what you eat, your esophagus, your stomach, right?
So what you eat goes down your esophagus.
Goes down your esophagus into your stomach. Okay, then it moves into the small intestine, and it goes through, and then it moves into your large intestine, your colon, and then it exits it from the body.
So where's the gut? Is it the one intestine? Is it the other intestine, or is it the whole thing?
So we call it gut is a general reference, right, to that process. You could technically refer your tongue, your oral cavity, your esophagus. That's all part of your gut, ultimately, or it's all part of that process. And if you think of it, if you shrink us down and squeeze us together, we're really like a donut, right? And all we're doing is we're passing nutrients through that donut, and the donut has these little arms that reach out and say, oh, we want that. Oh, we want that. Oh, we want that. And then that's how nutrients are brought into the body, okay?
Okay, and so typically the blood wouldn't want a certain thing in that situation you mentioned, but it's getting in there?
Yeah, it can leak into it. Some people have coined the term, I think a long time ago, it was called leaky gut. And they've been calling it leaky gut for a long time. And now we use perhaps a more appropriate term, gut permeability or intestinal permeability, which essentially means leaky gut, right?
Right.
Things can permeate through the intestinal layer or lining that otherwise shouldn't have.
What's something that would go through that liner that could be a serious health issue?
A milk product, protein. So milk protein, it's really large, okay? And usually your body will just push it through. But if there's ulcerations, irritation, you can get a milk protein that will cross that lining into the blood, and then it causes all sorts of problems because your body identifies it pathogenically.
So could that
There's
be...
a protein in the blood that shouldn't be there. Your immune system says, whoa, we've got to alert an immune response. Now we're dealing with the immune system.
So could that be confused with lactose intolerance? Or is that the same thing? I'm
Yeah,
wading way out of my comfort zone here.
Yeah, but that is really a lot of the development of lactose intolerance, right? So patients who have lactose intolerance, that's part of that issue, right? There's a variety of different things that go into that as well that we're really not talking about today. But absolutely, it's when you have gut irritation, the lactose or the enzyme, not the enzyme, the protein of milk product, dairy from cows, it's a lot larger than the proteins from your mother, from the human, right? So when we consume breast milk, it's far more amenable to our bodies than if we consume cow's milk.
Okay. So we talked about skin conditions.
So skin conditions, is one thing.
Potentially permeable, leaky guts.
Yeah, but patients aren't going to really know. The way they might know that is if they have some sort of irritation in the bowel, they would know, okay, there's some bloating. They're going to experience bloating, or they'll experience constipation diarrhea, like alternating constipation diarrhea. Some people automatically jump on and say, oh, that's IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Well, IBS, okay, irritable bowel syndrome. But you came in with me complaining that your bowel was irritated, right? And then I turn around and tell you, yeah, you have a diagnosis. Your diagnosis is irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, which is really what you came in telling me, right? Well, we need to get beyond that, not just turn around and say, okay, this patient has IBS. Great, what do we do now? Well, let's put them here on this and put them there on that. Well, let's get in there and dig in a little bit and say, why do they have IBS? Why are they having alternating constipation diarrhea? Is it because of a leaky gut? Is it because of irritation to the lining? Is it because of an infection in the stomach? What's going on? So we have tests that we can evaluate that and check to see if there's some sort of disruption in a variety of different places in the gut.
What else is going to manifest as gut issues? We're going to get to the tips on how to improve this, but again, there are things that people might be experiencing and have no idea that it involves the gut.
Yeah. So again, we talked about bloating just there and alternating constipation diarrhea. So also you can have cravings, A lot of people don't realize this, but cravings as well can be a sign that you have gut complications, okay, or that you have a unbalanced, let's say, microbiome or gut flora. Cravings, especially sugar cravings.
I mean, everyone has sugar cravings, don't they?
No.
At some point.
Do you like to have sugar? Does sugar taste sweet? Yes, but
I'm not
like
even
cravings?
a sweets guy. But I'm not a sweets guy. But there are times after a meal where I'm like, I'm just craving sugar, and I'm sure there's more to it than that, and that's why I'm listening to you.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, when you say, I need sugar after a meal, and that's one of our classic questions.
Okay.
Do you need sugar after a meal?
Oh boy.
Or do you crave sugar during the day? Or we could even ask, if you miss a meal or skip a meal, do you have irritability?
Oh boy.
Or do you feel a lot more irritable if you skip a meal? And all of those things can be signs that you have gut issues or that you need to address gut health.
Okay.
Okay, so how do we address gut health? Now that we know, okay, here's a few things that can tell us, wait a minute, my skin conditions, right? Sometimes people even just excess dryness. Obviously, rashes, eczema, acne, things like that are going to be gut focused for me. But the reality is, once you clear up the gut, you're going to see a lot of those issues resolve. You're going to see them resolve. So what is it then that we need to do? So this is where we get into our 5 tips, right? So we're 16 minutes in.
It only took us 16 minutes.
That's good. Now we have 15 minutes to talk about them.
It's a good primer, though, for why I should care about these tips.
Yeah.
So here we go.
I think so. So number 1, I'm going to give these in an order, so I'm going to look at them. I wrote down these, and our number 1 is reduce or eliminate sugar, dairy, and wheat.
Oh, dairy as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought dairy's good, right? Like from cows, and it's natural. Even the carnivore folks. Well, yeah, they'll do cheese, won't they?
Yeah, cheese is good.
Okay, but eliminate. Tell me the worst.
Let's say milk.
So
milk. Say milk. So, and usually, let's say I have a patient. I just had a patient yesterday come in. Our most common offenders that cause upper respiratory, GI discomfort for an infant is milk, like dairy, cow's milk, and wheat, and sugar. So we take mom. If it's an infant, we take mom off of those things. And 80% of the time, completely resolves all the infant's issues.
I mean,
colicky baby, crying at night, whining, hard to sleep, right? Constantly waking up, complaining, acting like their abdomen's really hurting, difficult bowel movements. They resolve by taking mom off sugar, dairy, and wheat.
Which sounds simple, but is like literally the opposite of simple. It is so hard. Like, where do you start? I mean, sugar feels like it's in everything.
Yeah, so what I say to patients is start with processed. We're not really meant to eliminate all sugar, meaning the definition of sugar, like fructose, fruit sugar. When you eat a piece of fruit, that's sugar, right? When you eat foods in general, most foods contain sugars in them. So fruit is a great place to get your sugar. Honey, for instance, we've talked about honey on this podcast and how much I love honey. And I love honey so much because every single person should be replacing their sugar, in my opinion, with honey or with 100% organic maple syrup or some appropriate substitute that way. But the majority of our sugar, as in white cane sugar in this country, the process, the chemical process, the manufacturing, everything that goes to it has a lot of different additives and it's completely stripped of all of its nutrients. If you live in an area where you're actually harvesting sugar cane, and then you can drip that into a meal, or you can get properly harvested sugar cane before it's had all the nutrients stripped out of it, then go ahead, use sugar cane, right? But what we get usually in our culture, in our country, is completely, they call it clean, but basically it's had all of the minerals stripped out of it. And so all it is this completely, it's a substance that when you look at it, it's completely inflammatory. It's very inflammatory. So minerals themselves have a burn. The temperature at which they'll burn is very high, which means the minerals are very, very cold, dense themselves. So they're anti-inflammatory, we'd refer to them that way. But processed foods, for instance, have all the minerals stripped out of them. So they're very inflammatory. Does that make sense? And we can see that demonstrated in our diet, that our diet is so nutrient sparse that it's inflammatory. We've stripped all of the minerals, we've stripped all the vitamins out of it, and sometimes we even turn around and try to plug vitamins back in after we've stripped them out. More often than not, those are synthetic vitamins as well. But the key is we have to be looking for things as close to, we've talked about this principle as well, from farm to table or from field to table as possible. Where was it harvested? Can I get it? Can I source it as close to the place of harvesting as possible? So the tip was reduce or eliminate sugar, dairy, and wheat.
And I know we need to move on, but give me some common sources of wheat that are the worst offenders that people might, part of this is just raising awareness for folks on not even knowing what they may have been eating was a problem.
So people, usually when we talk about wheat, we're talking about gluten. Okay, it's really strong protein that's found in wheat. It's been bred, our wheat berries have been bred to have higher amounts of a glutenin, which is the protein. And this protein actually functions as a pesticide. So if you have a higher amount of a glutenin in a substance, it's going to cause more irritation to the bowel. We know that. So what happens is animals or insects will go and eat this glutenin. They'll get a lot of it in their bowel or their digestive tract, and we'll see them kind of swell, and their bellies will swell, and they eventually just explode, and they're done. And we've seen this happen. We know this happens because it's an insecticide, and we've selectively bred our wheat berries for this. Okay? So a glutenin, we know it does it. It acts as more of a natural insecticide. But if you have higher amounts of it, and you're selectively breeding for it because you know, hey, these plants actually seem to turn out a little bit better, or they're not affected as much by these pests, well, then you're going to selectively breed for them. But the fact of the matter is, the reason they're not, right? The reason that they're not taken up by those pests is because, well, when they eat them, they see that their bellies don't do so well. Well, what's going to happen to us? We get inflamed too. So it's really important with wheat that you be careful, stay away from it. Again, if you want a source and you think you've got a great place to source a wheat berry from a mill that's close to you, go ahead and try it, right? And pay attention to the way that you feel. I'm not a big fan of saying eliminate this food, eliminate that food, eliminate those foods. I like to be able to include as many foods as we possibly can in our diet, but we have to recognize when foods are causing inflammatory conditions and inflammatory problems in our gut and our GI. And gluten and substances that have higher amounts of gluten seem to be doing that.
All right, next tip.
Yeah. So our next tip, let's get to it. After eliminating, we want to add some fermented foods to our diet. So fermented foods are a great source of naturally occurring probiotics. One of the reasons we would use fermented foods as opposed to just taking a probiotic pill, which you can also do, and that's helpful and beneficial for a lot of people. Probiotic pills themselves have a very limited number of strands or species of bacteria. And so you're getting a small amount of species of bacteria, and if you continue to just consume those few species, well, eventually you may have those few species become more abundant, and it could adapt your physiology in an aberrant way or in a way that you don't desire. Okay, so I'm not dissing on probiotics. I think they're great, especially after a course of antibiotics. If you're taking antibiotics, you absolutely should be taking probiotics to try to restore the gut culture. Okay, but what's another way that you can restore or help to have a very diverse microbiome? A diversity that would be more than 10 species, more than 5 species, more than 25 species. We have like hundreds of thousands of species of gut bacteria in normal, healthy flora in the gut. Okay? And we have so many gut bacteria cells. So we really need to make sure we're encouraging as diverse a flora as possible. How do we do that? We're going to use like cultured vegetables, fermented foods, kimchi, sauerkraut. I like kombucha. In our home, we've developed my wife especially, she likes to do a Friday night thing. It was kind of a thing for her and her family and something that she wanted to initiate for our kids as well, to where we could have, I would call it soda and pizza night, right? People love to have pizza night, and they love soda with pizza. So we're looking at this saying, okay, well, how do we implement this for our family? Because the last thing I am going to eat is pizza. It doesn't work for me, especially the breads and the dough and the wheat that goes into the pizza is usually not a quality dough, not a quality wheat. And so it causes a lot of gut issues. So what we decided to do is we would do a variety of different types of bread. She sourced wheat from a very specific mill that she felt really comfortable with and thought it was good. And I said, sure, let's try it. So on Friday nights, if she's feeling up to it, she'll actually whip up some dough, and the kids will make their own little pizzas, and they get to roll those out, and that's really fun. But also I'll go to the store and we'll get like cauliflower crust pizzas, and we'll get the sourdough crust pizzas. And so we'll get a variety of them. And the kids will eat, they'll eat some sourdough crust, some cauliflower crust. They don't mind. They like them all. And so it's a lot of fun. But we also implement kombucha. So we use a variety of different brands. We use some Kavita brand. We use also Live brand.
Any problem with the caffeine in there?
And we also use GT's brand.
Okay.
So in kombucha, they'll typically use as a start a little bit of sugar, right? So they'll have a little bit of sugar, and then they also have some tea. They'll either use green tea or they'll use a little bit of black tea. However, Kavita typically will do dairy starts, right? So they'll use theirs a little bit differently. So they'll do theirs more like kefir.
Yep.
So if you're familiar with kefir, it's just a different way of getting there rather than using the sugar and the tea. So we like to use my favorite, and I'll do a short on this. How about that? We should do this. But if you're switching from soda, because that's what I'm talking about, let's switch from soda. Let's go to the Live brand. If you're familiar with this Live brand of kombucha, you'll love it. They have Doctor, they have cola, they have root beer, they have lime, they have all of those type of flavors that are very traditional to sodas, and they did a pretty darn good job of doing it. Now, when you first taste it, you first drop that can of soda and you pick up the kombucha, the Live kombucha, even though they did a really good job of flavoring them. Your first few sips you're going to taste the vinegar in there. It's going to taste like vinegar, and you're going to go, whoa, what is that? But you drink, give yourself a little time, let your taste buds settle into it and understand a little better what it is. And all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, yeah, it tastes like root beer. Or yeah, it tastes like Dr.
Yeah,
Pepper.
those are pretty good kombuchas. I almost feel like I'm cheating when I drink the Live brand.
You do, yeah. So, and then once you've graduated from the Live brand, you do the Live, right? Then you can go, okay, you know what? I'm going to let's go try let's go try this other brand, which here's a few different brands. Let's try this one that is GTS or GTs, I think is what it is. So they have one that is root beer, and I think they have a Cascara one. They have a variety of different ones as well, but they do a really good job with their root beer one that tastes so good. So it's actually based in mushrooms. Mushrooms are huge right now. They use lion's mane, they use chaga. They have really great formulas. They also use a little bit of apple cider vinegar, so you're going to get your gut culture benefits there too. But then if you're feeling like, hey, you know what, I feel like I could graduate and move up to this one, then you can use what is close to one of my favorites, and that is the Kavita brand, and they have like elderberry, but these are vinegars. So you look at the vinegars. Now we've stepped away from kombucha altogether, and we're talking about vinegars. So Kavita.
And these are ones you could give to your kids because they don't have black or green tea in them.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and these are the ones I like the most, right? These are my favorites. So elderberry, and then also there's a mandarin orange one that is really good. It tastes so, like, really it does taste so good. And we're talking about vinegars.
You're
right?
so excited about these. Yeah. Okay, what's your favorite brand?
I don't have a favorite brand.
Oh, Kavita was at the top.
I can't do it. Yeah, Kavita, and then after that we would say, what would be the purest? The purest would be, okay, let's go to our Bragg's apple cider vinegar.
That's some heavy-duty stuff.
That is, I don't know if you could really graduate from Kavita to Bragg's. I don't know if that's a graduation thing. I think you just say, every now and then I'll take some Bragg's, but as far as drinking status, I think Kavita is probably, the Kavita vinegars are probably the best.
I've watched long YouTube videos on whether to consume apple cider vinegar daily, so we'll save that for something else. But we've talked so far about taking in foods that have been fermented, kimchi, sauerkraut. We talked about probiotics. We talked about kombucha. We also talked about avoiding wheat, gluten, dairy, sugar. So what's next?
So prebiotics, consuming prebiotics, meaning now you've been giving your body those foods that are going to generate or provide biotic culture and biotic species. Well, now a prebiotic almost is something that a biotic species would consume, right? So that's considered a prebiotic. Well, what is a healthy prebiotic? Sugar is actually a prebiotic, but processed sugar, processed carbs, things like that, I would consider those unhealthy, poorly generating prebiotics. So they will feed culture that you don't want fed. Okay, when you consume those foods, processed carbs, processed sugars, things like that, and candies, cookies, cakes, pastas, all of that type of stuff, they're going to feed the biotic cultures that you don't want fed. And those biotic cultures that you don't want fed, they're off-gassing, and they're doing all sorts of things that make you feel bloating. They cause acne. These are the ones that disrupt your serotonin levels. They disrupt your sleep. So it's bad news. So get good prebiotic type food. So how do I feed? So there's another way to think about it. How do I feed the bacteria that I've placed in there with the quality of fermented vegetables or fermented foods that I've consumed? Now, how do I feed those and keep them healthy? You do that with a few things. Things such as onions, bananas, okay, asparagus, artichokes, and garlic.
How do I consume garlic? Because that can be a lot.
I would also say, I'll go back to that in just a second, but I would also say sprouts. Sprouts are a really good way as well. And if you're wanting to consume and get the benefit that you've read about, wheat has so many nutrients and things in it, and you want to do it in a health-based way, then use sprouting as a method to consume wheat. Okay? So how do you consume garlic? Well, first of all, choose to put it in your food. And not just garlic powder, but fresh, raw garlic. Now, garlic contains allicin, which is an antibiotic. It's an antibiotic that has been compared to other antibiotics on the market, like medication antibiotics. And it performs just as well in many cases. So allicin performs as an antibiotic. If you crush the garlic, like with a spoon, leave it for a bit, it'll develop and start to release that allicin, and then you throw it in your food. Okay? And I don't mean like, you can dice it up or shred it up and sprinkle it in a salad. That could be nice with small amounts. But if let's say you're putting on a pot of stew, throw some garlic cloves in there. Crush them first. Let them sit for about a minute, and then throw them into your stew.
So not using to saute, but using afterwards.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so for sauteing, we're trying to pull that flavor out too, right? And that's helpful. People often will put lots of garlic on the pan when they're doing a steak or something, and that helps with flavor as well. But to get the allicin out, as far as the antibiotic and the beneficial flora that way, just crush it and then throw the whole clove in the stew. But if you're doing if I were doing, say, a steak, I would probably do the same thing. I would chop up lots of garlic. I would shred some and sprinkle it over the steak. And then I would chop up a bunch and put it in the pan with the butter, right? Or the ghee that you're using to saute it.
Okay, very good. Are we on to number 4 now?
I hope so. So our number 4 is, let me get back to this real quick, managing our stress.
I was going to say sleep and stress had to be in there somewhere.
Yeah, managing our stress. So stress... there is a gut-brain connection, and we have to look at this from the health of the brain and the health of the gut. We talked about the gut-blood barrier. There's also a brain-blood barrier. Most people have heard of that, right? The blood-brain barrier. Well, there's a gut barrier also that we talked about as well now, and that blood-gut barrier could be penetrated inadvertently if we're consuming foods that aren't going to be serving us properly. So what we need to be doing is consuming foods that are going to be anti-inflammatory and not irritating to our lining of our gut and not to the brain. Now, stress. Let's get back to stress. We have a vagus nerve that essentially is like our connection unit between our brain and our gut. And it also regulates. The vagus nerve is like this regulator of the autonomic nervous system. Okay? So if the vagus nerve plays a significant role between my brain and my gut, and it's one of the major regulators of the autonomic nervous system, anytime I'm stressed, what happens to the balance of my autonomic nervous system? Whoosh, we go way out of balance. Okay? So then what's going to happen to my gut? It's going to slow or stop or be disrupted. We already know that if I'm running around through the forest and I see a tiger, the last thing my body needs to be doing after the initial shock of maybe you're like, oh my gosh, it scared me so bad I peed my pants, right? So right. You have this, oh my gosh, I'm wetting myself because I'm so scared. But then after that, what's going to happen is your body says, okay, we need all of our extremities. We need them functioning well, and we need them functioning now. So get out of here, right? So it pushes all the blood to these places. It restricts the blood flow and the mechanisms that are happening centrally. So our gut's not functioning like it should be anymore. The balance is off. So we're in a state of fight or flight or panic. We have to run. We push all the blood, all the utility that is there in the autonomic nervous system goes to the extremities. So anytime we're in higher amounts of stress, we're going to be doing the same thing, even though we may not see directly that tiger. Well, now what's going to happen? My gut is going to become dysfunctional, ultimately.
That makes so much sense because now we're all living in fight or flight with
exactly.
the stress and the speed of the modern day world. And if it plays out the way you said, obviously that's what it does, that when you're stressed out, your body stops focusing on the gut because it's got to, survive the tiger. And we're living in perpetual states of fight or flight. It's like, oh my gosh. So the gut dysregulation, that feels like a simple way for me to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's what happens. Your gut, because that should be moving, those signals should be regularly moving through our vagus nerve. And vagus nerve, we can actually get inflamed because there's so many signals going through there. And then it becomes a whole other ball of wax that we just don't want. We don't want to have to deal with all of that because there's a lot of different conditions that will develop after that. You can even have thyroiditis, autoimmune-related disorders, inflammatory disorders all over the board. But what we want to really focus on is the fact that a dysfunction in our stress levels and our regulation of stress, the dysfunction there can and does cause gut issues.
Makes sense to me.
So,
go ahead.
No, I apologize.
As you were, I think, going to reference your last point, we did another, podcast about health, and you said the number one thing I ask a patient when they come in, and you want to get them a blood panel because that helps you, kind of informs the story that you're going to listen to them, you're going to look at their blood work. But the first thing you say that you kind of focus on is like, how can we eliminate stress from your life? How can we work on the stress? Like, that's so fundamental to overall health. I think people think about exercise and diet, and they know relationships and stress is a huge part of their life, but I don't think people, and I'm not saying that I've figured it out, I just don't think people quite understand, based on my interviews with you, how important stress is.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully people have been able to understand the significance of it now. People, frequently I hear them suggest that they can handle significant amounts of stress almost like it's a badge of honor. The badge of honor really needs to be how well we can treat ourselves, how well we can take care of ourselves, right? And yes, we will be needing to go through times of stress, and those times of stress do fortify us. Those moments of stress when we come up against the tiger or the challenge, it helps to establish a level of knowledge, a level of wisdom within us, and a level of confidence that says, I can take this on and I can do more. And therefore, we've fortified ourselves against the challenges of life, right? So that is a very significant thing for us to do. And we need stressors to a degree, but what we're talking about is stressors to a significant, either over a prolonged amount of time, or stressors that are so significant that they overwhelm the system and cause a dysfunction in the autonomic nervous system.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
So last tip, you ready?
I've been ready the whole time.
All right, you're still ready. You're born ready.
Born ready.
There you go. You're born ready. Okay. So last tip is exercise and hydrate. So I put those together. They usually go together. You exercise and you hydrate. You think about athletes often hydrating. So exercise and hydration plays a significant role as well in gut health. These are things that you can do to benefit your gut. Okay. Well, why would exercise benefit your gut? Going out and going for a walk causes contractions in the limbs, that pumps the blood and moves it through your body. It distributes the fluid and the liquid that hopefully you've drunk because you're getting hydrated, right? And you're staying hydrated. And that fluid moving through your body is going to plug into your gut and your GI to help prevent any sort of dryness that would cause constipation. So we want to have the perfect amount of fluid in our gut and our GI so that our stools can move through at a very nice rate. Because if they go through too slow, then it's constipation. But also, not just that, if they go through too slowly, what can happen is, just like happens in your fermentation process, you can actually have fermenting stool in your gut, in your GI. And the stool, if it's not moving through well enough or quickly enough, can cause bloating and can cause all sorts of distension in your abdomen. So we want to make sure the stool is actually moving through at the appropriate rate. Walking, running, actually the physical contractions of squeezing the abdomen, causing that contraction, right? When you're running, turning, twisting, jumping, all of those activities, whatever you choose to do in your activity of exercise, get it done. And if walking is your go-to exercise, it will benefit your gut. It will benefit your GI. If all you can do all day is, because you're focused at your desk and you stand up and you do squats, it will help your gut. Okay? It will help your gut and your GI. Hydration is big because, again, we need to stay hydrated because all of our cells are dependent on water. We're dependent on water. When we look, I just got an IV myself, I was telling you about today. I mixed an IV and was able to have that given by my nurse here today for me. And When we look at saline solution, we have saline solutions that we deliver oftentimes for patients. Well, there are also mixtures of where we'll mix sterile water and saline and a variety of vitamins just to try to get the tonicity right. Well, we're trying to match the tonicity, or we're trying to match the fluid as close as possible to the blood, okay? So that when it goes in there, it's not, the body recognizes it well, essentially. Okay, so the blood is essentially referred to in its balance of minerals and nutrients. It's like seawater. Now it's not direct seawater in its balance of nutrients, right? But it's this perfect balance of water and minerals, right? And this hydrated state. So we need to consume minerals as well. It's not just H2O for our hydration. That's the point that I'm making. Okay, it's not just H2O for our hydration. You also have to have minerals in the water that you're consuming. Some people use lemon, which is a source of getting minerals, right? And other people will use different sweeteners, or they'll use packets where like immune type of boosting packets and things. But you want to make sure that you're getting minerals. I think here we have like sea salt. You can get Celtic sea salt, which I think is probably the best option, or real salt in this area, which is a fantastic option as well. And those are things that are going to help you stay hydrated.
I have some great tips. I'm very excited. We could talk forever. Do you feel like we cut anything short?
Yeah, I probably blabbered on a little too much, but
well, my gut says we should get back to the kids. My gut says
listen to your gut.
Listen. Just like y'all have listened to the Be Well Now podcast. Thank you, Dr. Dummar.
You are welcome. It was fun.
Namaste.
Namaste, everyone.